Okay, time for Ashura Doji Part 2. So, this is going to cover all the way up from just after Odin's death. Sorry for the beeping in the background. Cover just after Odin's death, and when he's kind of thinks he's all alone, all the way up until just before the Battle of Onigashima. So, starting with that. So as I stated at the end of the last video, Ashura Doji found his way back to kind of like the area where he first lived when he was, kind of the leader of the bandit group there, and where he'd probably kind of set up his like Yakuza base during the time frame when Odin was gone to help keep the region somewhat stable. He ends up back there, and he ends up taking up the name Shutenmaru at this point in time, in order to kind of, prevent him from being recognized by, Odin, or being as recognized by, Kaido and whatnot. Better to lie low that way. Fair enough. And he, builds up his crew, builds up his gang again, probably other ones who had already been part of his gang or stuff like that, other ones who had believed in Odin and wanted to, protect Curry and Wano and such, other ones who had been, like inspired by, Shinobu, and then, later on, Toki's prophecy. He eventually does end up finding out about Toki's prophecy, about, the return of the missing Scabbards and everything. Unfortunately, he does kind of end up getting to the point where he, starts to doubt the prophecy. He doesn't fully believe the prophecy. I don't know how much he would have been aware of like Toki's ability to manipulate time. We know that Inuarashi and Nekomamushi probably knew about it because of, they had been on Whitebeard's crew when they found Toki with Odin and everything. So, it's like, and like her explaining to Odin about stuff about like, oh yeah, I'm from like 830 something years in the past or whatever during the Void Century. So there's kind of that thought. But whether or not she asked them to like, don't tell the other Scabbards about this, I don't want this, information sneaking out, which is good because then it means Kanjuro didn't know about it until later on, until just before everything happened, so he wasn't really able to send a message to Orochi about it at that point in time. But, Ashura Doji kind of, he learns about, Toki's prophecy, and he's like, okay, well, I don't know how much faith I put into it, but maybe it just means some of the other ones managed to escape the island. Because, like, he wouldn't know where Denjiro was because they got separated from each other. And he, doesn't know where any of the other ones are either. So he'd probably just be like, well, maybe they managed to escape the island or something. So we'll see what, that's kind of where his, answer lied. During that time frame, builds up power and, stuff in the region, becomes very much this thug as, like, the leader of the Mount Atama thieves and bandits and everything, setting themselves up on Top Knot Hill, which is just adorable. And from there, what ends up happening is, stuff just kind of stays, not too much going on there. But eventually, when we get to about 10 years prior to when, everything happens in Wano, so about, 10 years into about halfway through the waiting time for the prophecy, what ends up happening is, unfortunately, a bunch of the people who are part of, like, his group and other, extended acquaintances and everything like that are like, we're not going to be able to keep fighting. We can't keep doing this. It's like, by the time the prophecy is set to be fulfilled in another 10 years, we're not going to be in fighting shape anymore. We're not going to be able to help fight to protect our country, to protect our families and our countries and our country and everything like that. And, Ashura realizes what they want to do. They want to do a suicide mission by trying to get to Onigashima and try to fight against Kaido and his crew. And it is that. It is a suicide mission because it is just, Ashura knows what they fought against when he and the Scabbards and Odin fought against Kaido and his forces before, and they were defeated, and there were fewer of them, but they were stronger than the thieves and such that would be going. and he tries to talk them out of it, and it doesn't work. And they end up, they start making they prepare their ships and they sail off toward Onigashima, and Ashura can do nothing except watch helplessly while they sail off. He just helplessly tries to stop them, and he can't do that. He can't convince them to just wait another 10 years. Wait for the prophecy to come. Wait for, the others to show back up again. Wait for Toki's prophecy. Even with as little stock as he's put into the prophecy before, he's like, but do you guys believe in this prophecy? So why are you trying to go against it now? And they're like, well, what else can we do? We're not going to be strong enough anymore we're going to be old by the time this battle happens again, and we're not going to be able to do anything. So if we go now, maybe we can do something. And it is like, we do get the comparison to it is like the boys jumping off the cliff yelling Sunache, for like courage as they head off to what is essentially their death, unfortunately. And Ashura just watches helplessly as they all die. He knows they don't come back. And then they make the graveyard for them, the funeral grounds for them, for all the ones who, died in that battle, which we'll come back to later. But he's just so distraught by this. And the thing is like, just like Denjiro, just like Kawamatsu, just like Inarashi and Nekomamushi go back to Zou. So they're not first-hand witnesses to what's going on in Wano with Orochi and Kaido and all of their machinations and destruction and everything else like that. Ashura, Kawamatsu, and Denjiro are. They witness what goes on. Denjiro is doing it directly from next to Orochi as he watches all of this happen, biding his time. Kawamatsu, who will be in the next set, will be the focus of the next set, he spends this time first trying to take care of Hiyori. Then he doesn't have her anymore, so he tries to gather up weapons and befriends, Onimaru. And then he gets captured and spends a good chunk of time in prison before he's then, freed when, when the attack happens on the Udon prison with Big Mom and everything. Ashura Doji is the one who is out in the outskirts in Curry, watching firsthand as they destroy this land that Odin built up over the last, 20-something years, that he built the Paradise Farm and everything else like that, just watching firsthand as it is slowly being destroyed. And as the areas are poisoned and the animals are poisoned and the streams and everything else are poisoned from the runoff from the factories and everything, and how the only clean source of food really is the Paradise Farm. And he and his crew act, they are bandits, and they do probably a lot of not nice things necessarily. Also, he's kind of acting as like the Yakuza boss in the area, to a degree. And so it's like so much of this where he is just like he puts on this, tough guy act that does not care, because he's like, well, these idiots keep believing that the prophecy is going to be fulfilled, and they're just, they're just idiots. He views them as this because he's also viewing himself to a degree as an idiot, because we know that during this time frame, he gets a hold of the blueprints for Kaido's castle on Onigashima. He manages to get a hold of those from whatever geisha or whatever. And we also know that he and his crew have managed, he and his, gang and everything have managed to save up a bunch of these different ships that they can then use as transport to get to Onigashima when the time came. So they're building up a bunch of this stuff that is useful for like when this war is going to happen, this battle against Kaido and Orochi will finally happen with the prophecy. But it's like he's like viewing himself as an idiot for believing that this is going to work, and that's why he calls other people idiots too, or hopeless fools, or whatever you want to call them, hopeful fools, in all of this. So it's like it's a bunch of that set up there. And so it's like all of that time frame for those 20 years, that's what he's doing. And he remembers Toki's prophecy, and there's probably nights for him where he just like probably lies awake after he's drank too much and is just dreaming of talking with his friends again, dreaming of talking with Odin again, or Toki, or watching Hiyori and Momonosuke run around and play and everything, and remembering when everything was peaceful, wishing that could be the case again. And that's probably a lot of what he dreams about at night. Very similar to, Brook when he's trapped on, the Rumbar pirate ship for, 50 years. That's what he keeps imagining his friends. And Ashura keeps doing that. And that pays off then later when, the fake Odin shows up that's made by Conjuro, which I'll go over in the third video. That Ashura is one of the ones that is able to see right through it, because he knows what it's like to want to imagine that Odin has returned and know that it can't be real because Odin is dead. The same way that, Robin saw through, Black Maria's illusions when they were fighting, the same way that Brook did too. They were both very capable of it, because Ashura Doji, Robin, and Brook all have kind of had those moments where it's just like they get so low with everything that they've thought about, with everything that they've seen and done. Or Brook, how lonely he is, because Ashura Doji is not alone. He's got his other crew. He's got the people there who are part of his the Mount Atama thieves and everything else like that. So he's not alone. And some of them knew Odin, but he also knows what it's like now to watch several of his, just so many of his comrades head off to this pointless battle, and knowing that they didn't come back because they died, and then they have empty graves because they died on Onigashima and Kaido didn't care to give them proper funerals. So there's that. And so Ashura Doji spends these 20 years going through those, cycles again and again and again in his head, probably. Very similar to everything Robin's gone through and what Brook goes through. And then we get into the actual Wano arc. So the first time that we are introduced to Ashura in the manga and in the show is when he has arrived at Okabore town, because he has heard about Luffy and the others having stolen the food cart and everything with all the food from the Paradise Farms and brought it to Okabore town along with the water. So him and his gang show up there, and he's just lounging on the back of his ox thing or whatever that he has. I don't know, I just find that funny. He's just lounging on that and drinking. And he shows up there, and he's like, "So where'd you guys get all this food from?" And they're like, "It was, it was, bestowed upon us by a hero, whatever." And he, him and his crew decide that they're going to try to take it. And there's this one little old lady that stands in his way. This little old lady who is probably, is possibly in her 80s or whatever. Because Ashura Doji is 56, 54, 56. Ashura Doji is 56 during this time frame. And this little old lady who has probably, watched so much of, her own country get destroyed around her, just like Ashura Doji has, is sitting there with her prayer beads in her hands and not moving an inch as Ashura is just staring down at her. And it's the offer is well, if you give us this food, then we'll protect you from the beast pirates in return. And she's like, no, well, we'd rather take the food, basically. And he gets ready to attack her. And then, ironically enough, this woman is saved because Jack shows up. Because Jack shows up and he starts trying to fight Ashura Doji. And it's just kind of funny because it's just yeah, you kind of exist, lady, now because Jack decided to, show up here now and be annoying to Ashura Doji. I don't think she's going to thank Jack anytime soon, but, that woman was very much prepared to die for, no, this food needs to stay here for our citizens. We need it far more than you do. Type of a thing. And so then we move into where Ashura Doji is then going to end up fighting against Jack. And we first kind of have like the first blow is Ashura against Jack, and he just makes this big slice down Jack's chest. And this is supposed to demonstrate, like setting it up this way is because like we know that Jack spent, several days and nights on, fighting on and off against, Inarashi and Nekomamushi back on Zou. And so this is just kind of to demonstrate how strong Ashura is in comparison. And give us a bit of a taste. To be fair, we're introduced to him as Shutenmaru at this point in time, not Ashura Doji. But he goes through and, so we kind of get to see this clash between the two of them, and they start fighting and everything. And Jack mentions that, like, I'm not allowed to kill you because, like, Kaido wants you alive because he wants you to be one of his subordinates. He wants you to work for him because he knows that you're strong and everything. Which a lot of people would probably take as a compliment. Ashura does not take that as a compliment. He despises Kaido for everything that has happened. And so him and Jack fight, and then their fight ends up getting interrupted because that's when Kaido shows up. And, Kaido shows up, giant dragon claw appears out of the sky, giant freaking dragon appears in the sky over Okabore town because Kaido has been called because Hawkins has said that the Straw Hats are here and that they, stole a bunch of food and they're causing problems. So Kaido shows up, he's very sloshed because he's still trying to get over what happened, that Doflamingo was, captured by the government and everything, and he blames Luffy for that, which is fair. It is Luffy's fault, Luffy and Law's fault that Doflamingo got captured. So Kaido shows up, kind of stops the fighting between Jack and Ashura Doji, and Ashura Doji is just like, yeah, fine, and him and his band start heading off, him and his gang start heading off to, band sounds like they're going to start playing music, him and his gang are going to head back off to the forest, but Kaido spots him and he remembers him from, back when they fought 20 years ago, and he remembers him as like one of, someone associated with Oden, so he's trying to get him to become one of his subordinates, and Ashura just does not like this, and, thankfully, Hawkins kind of moves Kaido's attention away from Ashura Doji and toward the Oden Castle and telling him that that's where the Straw Hats are. He's technically right, but he doesn't know that. This leads, of course, to the castle being attacked, blah, 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 blah. Thankfully, the rest of them are there. And Luffy shows up, and this is where he starts to fight Kaido. And I believe Ashura does see some of this, because he watches Luffy. It's a futile attempt to try to fight Kaido, but the fact that Luffy even tries, Ashura's like, fair enough. You tried. You failed. So, and now you're captured. Okay. So he heads back to the Mount Otama bandits. But he does sense Luffy's, Supreme King Haki. And he realizes that that's the same power that Oden had, because Oden also had, the Haki of the Supreme King and everything, had the Conqueror's Haki. And Ashura hasn't felt that for a while. He's probably felt that from Kaido, because we know Kaido has it, but, he hasn't really felt that from that many people in his life. And now he's feeling it from Luffy directed at Kaido, and he's like, okay, maybe this kid's got more guts than I thought. Is kind of like what's going through Ashura's head. But then he just heads back from Okabore town. They don't end up taking any of the food, I don't believe. I don't think Ashura necessarily genuinely wants to try to take all of the food away from the citizens, because he knows how much they're suffering, but it's also he's having to put on this act type of a thing. I'm not saying he wouldn't have taken food, but you get the idea. Then we get back to Mount Otama, where Ashura ends up clashing with Nekomamushi because, or not Nekomamushi, Ashura Doji clashes with Inarashi, excuse me. And, they're clashing. And Kinemon and Kiku are there as well, along with Little Momonosuke are there as well. So this is after everything has happened at the castle, and they, Tok and, Shinobu has managed to save them and everything with her devil fruit. So they're like clashing and arguing and everything, and Kinemon and Inarashi are trying to convince Ashura that, you need to join us, you need to come back and help us and help defeat Kaido and everything. And like Ashura wants nothing to do with this. Um, and one of the things that Ashura says is like he swore loyalty to Odin, not loyalty to the entire Kozuki family. So his answer is like, so therefore my loyalty does not extend to Momonosuke. He is just, this little kid who clearly is not able to stand up to the legacy of his father yet. And, so Ashura is very angry about that. So Kinemon just ends up ignoring all of this. And he's just, very determined to try to convince Ashura to rejoin them and everything and join their cause and everything. And we get this because, like, as I said, Inarashi has been on, Zou the past 20 years and hasn't seen what Wano has been going through entirely. He's seeing where it's at now, but not the decline that it went through. And then, Kinemon and Kiku and Momonosuke the same way that are there, it's very good with this distance that is depicted between Ashura and them. Because Ashura has stayed here the entire time and seen what's been going on, and he has lost so much faith in, the people of Wano and everything else like that, because he has seen how downtrodden they have become. And he doesn't blame them for that. He understands that. Because he himself is having those same issues where he's like, I don't know what to do anymore. I can only be mean to so many people. It's like, I can only be mean to so many people. And so, he's, they're trying to convince him. So they leave, and then Kinemon comes up with the stupid idea of stealing supplies and food from Hold'em and the Beast Pirates and Bakura Town, and then they, put the blame on the Mount Atama bandits, which then results in, that will eventually lead to a conflict between Hold'em and Ashura Doji. Will they fight? But first, we have the broadcast of Yasuie's execution, and when this is happening, Ashura and his gang have shown up at Bakura Town where they are projecting the execution as it is happening. And he, of course, recognizes, Sukiyaki as well as, the other Scab, because like Inarashi and why do I keep saying Nekomamushi? Because I'm so used to saying the two of them together. Inarashi and Kinemon are there as well, and they're watching as the execution is happening. And this is being paired with the fact because at the same time we are having it be that, like, as you're watching it in the anime or reading it in the manga, Hiyori is explaining to Zoro about the smile fruits, and Ashura is now explaining the smile fruits to the other Scabbards. And, because, like, they're watching as, as Yasuie is executed, and then as like all of the different ones who have the four smile people and everything, the victims of the smile fruits are running in, and how they are just laughing and laughing and laughing so much to cry, and like Inarashi and Kinemon are like, what is going on? And then Ashura explains to them what the smile fruits actually are, and this just horrifies them the same way that it horrifies Zoro when Hiyori is explaining it to him. So they're just horrified by this idea of what the smile fruits are, because they hadn't realized what it was. And Yasuie's execution, his death, very much hits Ashura Doji very hard. And of course, then he kind of like scolds Inarashi and Kinemon, and then he heads back to Mount Atama. Then we have it where he ends up fighting Hold'em at this point in time. And, Hold'em shows up, him and, Ashura fight, because Hold'em believes that Ashura and his crew are the ones who took the supplies from their, storehouses. No. And, this results in, a fight between the two of them. And of course, because Hold'em has, fire abilities and everything for whatever reason, this results in now, Mount Atama ends up getting set on fire and burned to the ground. And so they have that, and Kinemon and Inuarashi show up when this is happening, and like they kind of get the fire put out, but Mount Otama has been destroyed, and they're still like, there's kind of like the whole thing of like, are you still gonna not join us? And this is where Ashura is like, come with me, I have something to show you, and he takes them to the graves, and he shows it to them, and he explains to them about what happened 10 years ago, about how so many of his comrades, his friends, that they had gone on this kamikaze mission to Onigashima and failed, and they all died, and this is what's left. And it's like he's scolding them for like, you guys weren't here for the past 20 years. Yes, Inuarashi, you and Nekomamushi, you still aged, you didn't go into the future, but you weren't here. And Kinemon, yes, I understand that for you, Odin's death and everything that happened was only a few months ago at this point in time. For me, that was 20 years ago, and I have had to watch as so many people here in Wano have died at the hands of Kaido and Orochi and all of that crap. And so many of my friends died when this happened. And I don't know if I can take any more of it to watch more people that I care about and watch more of this country suffer and die. And he's like showing them, and like he's trying to make them understand the price that is going to be paid for their rebellion. And he's not wrong, because in hindsight, he dies and Izo dies out of the Scabbards. Luffy almost dies in fighting Kaido. Kinemon almost dies during that battle as well. Zoro nearly dies, and we don't actually get like a head count of how many people from the ninja pirate Minx samurai alliance, how many of them die that are the warriors from Wano. I don't know if we ever get a head count on that for how many that do die, but Ashura is trying to make them understand the price that is going to be paid for this battle. I was like, are you willing to put, this is just what happened the last time something like this happened, the last time anybody tried to rebel against them. And are you willing to still try to pay that same price again? And, Ashura is very valid in this regard. And if he'd been one of the Scabbards to, like, sit out the battle, I don't think us as readers necessarily would have blamed him given what we find out here. He doesn't, because, Kinemon then, very much bows and gets all the way down on his hands and knees and, like, begs for forgiveness for, like, what happened, and that they weren't there and that they didn't know and everything. And then we get these, reveals kind of one after the other of, like, Ashura being like, he's determined this time to, to rejoin his comrades now. And, to fight for those who have fallen already, and to try to just overwhelm Kaido and Orochi as much as they can and restore the Kozuki family, restore Momonosuke to the throne. And that is their intention. So this also, this is when he also reveals, oh yeah, I've had the plans for Kaido's castle for like years now. So it's like, how did you even get those? Geisha? Thrift store? Pawn shop? Whatever you want to call it. Got it there. And then he also takes Kinemon and Inuarashi to where they have all of the different boats that they've been saving up. And it's just like, well, for transportation, we have these to get to Onigashima. They definitely need to be fixed up a bit, but we have them. And of course, those are the ones that, Usopp and Frankie and, any other shipwrights that they have with them, carpenters and stuff, are able to then, fix up and everything. That they do then use to get to Onigashima for the battle. Those boats then end up being burned. But we get all this, and then we have it where, the things kind of shift a little bit. We get a little bit more of, humor interaction between them, because Inuarashi and Ashura kind of, make fun of the fact that now they're older than Kinemon. And that, now he's the younger one, and, that they have the experience of so many battles that they fought now. as opposed to Kinemon, who is 20 years younger now in comparison, and like they're so they're like messing with Kinemon at that point in time, which is just funny. Um, it's just like this funny interaction there. So it's like things are shifting, and that they just begin to argue um, a little bit, but it's more just fun arguing and everything. So from there, Ashura's there kind of in the background as they're getting information about, from Raizo and Kawamatsu and everything else like that for information about, Udon and then the weapons and the other, others, ones that are warriors that had been trapped in Udon that will be joining them, the Yakuza and everything, and they get to work on the boats and everything. And Ashura is there when they find out that, oh yeah, Hiyori is alive. They don't say where, but Hiyori is alive. From Kawamatsu, they find out about that from Kawamatsu and Zoro. And then, of course, Ashura is just there in the background again as they are gathering, getting everything ready for the raid. And then, when it's time, they head off, start to march their way to Tokage Port. Him and the rest of the Scabbards and Shinobu and Momonosuke are all making their way there. And when they arrive, of course, there's like the storm that's going on, and there's nobody else there. There's just one little dinghy boat that they get in, and they're like, we have to at least try. And they get in the boat, and they leave Shinobu and Momonosuke on the shore, and they head out. And this is when Kiku is like, tells Kaido, or tells Kinemon, we have to figure out who the traitor is now. And then Kanjuro then, that's when Kanjuro reveals himself to be the traitor, and all the Scabbards are just so shocked and stunned by this revelation and everything, which is fair. And this then leads into them, destroying the fake Kanjuro, finding out that the real one is actually over on the shore and trying to capture Momonosuke, which he does, so he can bring Momonosuke to Onigashima. They, kind of try to stop this, and then that's when the Straw Hats, Heart Pirates, Kid Pirates, and the rest of the Alliance show up. And as Momonosuke is being taken away, and this, kind of, with Momonosuke telling him, but just like, no, just focus on getting to Onigashima. I'll be fine. I can, take care of myself at this point in time. And, and I'll to focus more on that when I get to talking about Momonosuke for this stuff, obviously, when I get to his videos, which are going to be some of the, I still got to figure out what set I'm doing after these ones. I haven't figured out if I'm going to talk about Kaido or not yet. Probably will, because he is technically in charge of like Onigashima and his own territory and everything. So what then ends up happening is, that's when, Kirishiro arrives with the other Scabbard, with them, and like reveals to the Scabbards that he is actually Denjiro, and, that there was, they got the message about being at the Habu port instead of the Tokage port, and then all this other stuff. And so that's where we're going to leave off for this, because that leads into the actual battle on Onigashima, raid on Onigashima. So that's what I have. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!